Hello and welcome to this 2 Degrees podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Kennett. At our recent 2 Degrees live event on raising the energy performance of properties, one of the key challenges raised was around the issue of landlord and tenant engagement. I caught up with Justin Snoxall, head of the business group at British Land and also chairman of the Better Building Partnership's Green Building Management Working Group, to see what advice he had to offer.
Thanks for joining us today, Justin. To begin with, why is it important that landlords and tenants work together on tackling energy and sustainability issues, and why is it such a challenge in the first place?
I think the first reason, it's important because neither landlords nor occupiers in office buildings can do this in isolation. Our experience in multi-let office buildings is that the landlord typically has more influence over 50% of the energy in a building, being the common parts and the shared central services for heating and cooling, and typically that consumption makes up about 50% of the energy, and the consumption directly consumed within occupiers' own space makes up, which is typically lighting and small power, computers, printers, all the small power that used in offices typically makes up the other 50% of energy. It's never completely clear cut. You can't draw a line and say that the occupier has complete control of this and the landlord has no influence over it. And equally, since the landlord is actually providing services to within the space that occupiers actually occupy, that it's clearly not clearly delineated that it is completely 100% the landlord and 100% the occupier. So they do need to, in an ideal world, they do need to collaborate, they do need to engage, they do need to share data, they do need to understand one another's needs, particularly the building management. The landlord needs to understand the occupier's needs so that they can then firstly satisfy the occupier's needs from an operational standpoint to ensure that they're providing the services that are required for the business. But then secondly, once they understand the occupier's needs, they can ensure that they can manage that building and manage the plant as efficiently as possible. And without understanding occupiers' needs, typically what will happen in a building is the building management will second guess the occupier, and because they don't want to have complaints, they will actually leave the plant and the lighting on pretty much the whole time.
And from your experience, is there an increasing trend for the two to be working together?
I think there are more and more landlords and occupiers who are willing and keen to work together. The challenge is finding ways for them to work together in such a way that it's meaningful. And that it actually produces results. I mean, ultimately what this is all about is about, particularly, I suppose, our focus in office buildings is about reducing energy. And so the prime purpose of all of this is to reduce energy. And if by meeting it doesn't result in reduced energy consumption, then yes, it perhaps improves understanding and perhaps improves the relationship between landlord and or building management and occupier. But if you're not achieving results, then you start to question why you're doing it.
Yeah. So you chair the Better Buildings Partnership Green Building Management Working Group. What's the aim behind that group?
The Better Building Partnership as a whole is obviously there. It was set up 4 years ago, I think now, to enable the largest landlords in London, one, to collaborate, to share best practice amongst themselves and improve understanding amongst themselves of all of these issues. But then secondly, to develop toolkits and to provide insights and knowledge to the industry as a whole, to try and drive the industry and to try and change the industry. So the Green Building Management Working Group was set up with a view to establishing one of these toolkits to provide some guidance to the industry as a whole as to how you can set up these green building management groups.
And how would you suggest then that landlords and tenants go about opening up the dialogue with the aim of setting up a green building management group?
I suppose the first thing to do is actually to start establishing a relationship, and I think quite often is the case, perhaps less so in buildings today, but still I think in many, that the building manager and certainly the landlord has very little interaction with the occupier. I think it is important that that landlords and building management start to understand and get to know their occupiers in their buildings, understand their operational requirements, and at least that begins to improve a dialogue between the two businesses. Ultimately, what you're seeking to do is to share data, is hopefully also to share and agree some shared targets, and to get consensus on decisions which may well impact more than one party in a building.
And who should be leading this group, and what other parties should be joining it?
In our experience, we think that the building management should be leading this group, and so a figurehead, a leader in the building management. The reason for that is that one, it's partly their day job to actually ensure the building is actually being operated efficiently, but also from their position, they are in a position perhaps more to liaise with all the occupiers in a building. But I think also, coming back to this point where at the beginning where I said that I think that building management has more influence on, say, 50% of the energy in a building being the common parts and shared services, that they can actually lead from the front, and actually by demonstrating reductions that they're achieving in the building, hopefully they can actually win hearts and minds of occupiers in buildings to achieve reductions within their own space.
So typically, what sort of information should they be looking to share? And do you need to establish some kind of common ownership?
If we're talking, I have obviously, this discussion has been largely about energy. We do also capture data on water and on waste. So I think the first thing is actually to get data, energy, water, waste for the building as a whole, and to track that data on an ongoing basis. And within that data, to be clear who has responsibility for who has more influence in actually achieving reductions of whatever that data is. If so, within energy, if we say that the occupier has more influence within their own direct consumption within their space, that energy data is actually reported and is part of their responsibility, and equally for the landlord, the common parts and shared services. As far as waste is concerned, again, collecting data across the building, and that then enables you to begin to have discussions with any interested parties, hopefully as many of the occupiers within that building and the building management, to agree common ways of disposing of waste and of recycling, and it may well result in actually cost savings in actually pooling and centralising services. And around energy, as I said, the building manager can lead from the front and actually show what they're doing within the common parts and within shared services. They can then also actually, where it's appropriate, provide support to occupiers within their own space. And clearly, when building management is making decisions around how to operate central plant, they need input from occupiers within that building.
Are you finding water usage is moving up the agenda?
Frustratingly not so, really. The feedback we have from stakeholders, and we've actually just recently had some workshops, particularly around carbon, and we asked our investors, occupiers, other CR specialists, where they ranked water, and water really ranked. It's not the most important issue. It probably ranks in the middle. It's not something that you should just ignore, but partially because it doesn't have the same commercial drive. It doesn't cost as much as energy. There isn't the same perceived requirement actually to manage this effectively, and certainly within our own business. I mean, the key thing around all of this whether it's energy or water or waste, is around being able to measure. And as far as water is concerned, if you don't have adequate metering in a building, you can't actually measure it effectively. And quite often you find in most commercial office buildings there's inadequate water metering in buildings, and trying to justify increased cost for more metering to enable you to actually achieve savings is quite difficult to achieve.
And are there any common pitfalls you should look out for when setting up and operating a green building management group?
I think that the important thing about setting up green building management groups is actually, despite the fact that we've given a fairly sort of prescriptive toolkit and guide from the Better Building Partnership, actually probably the critical thing is being as pragmatic as possible, is understanding actually how do those people, those parties involved in the green building management group, how do they want to engage with you? Do they actually want to have formal meetings? Do they actually just want to tag them on to their normal building management meetings? What do they actually want to achieve out of these meetings? It's about understanding really, it's in part about understanding what occupiers want. It's also in part about hopefully the building manager and the landlord showing some leadership and showing what is possible, and trying to persuade occupiers within a building to take on the possible and not actually to go for the easiest options.
And just one final question: how do you maintain momentum once you've set it up and got it running?
Clearly, once you've actually set it up and you've actually then it becomes more challenging. But I think if you ultimately, as I said at the start, this is all about achieving reductions, and so one needs to keep focused on actually how one can achieve reductions. We have learnt from our own experience that over the course of 4 years' worth of work, we've achieved significant reductions, but we believe we've still got more to do. So this isn't something that actually one achieves very quickly. I think other ways you can achieve maintain traction is by sharing best practice and celebrating success within buildings. So quite often our building management groups actually they create friendly competition, and so occupiers don't want to appear at the bottom of these league tables, and we unashamedly do produce league tables. Clearly, if they didn't want us to produce league tables, we wouldn't do so, but typically they're perfectly happy to have league tables, and they don't want to be at the bottom of them. So it does actually create some friendly competition and does actually motivate them to actually do some work. So I think it is about finding ways to engage, about making it fun for them, celebrating success, and being very focused on actually achieving results.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
Pleasure.
For more content from the recent 2 Degrees Live event, visit the Built Environment Working Group on www.2degreesnetwork.com.